Hey everybody, it's me, Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be discussing one of punk rock's finest bands, and they are one of the originals, the true originals. They came out the same time as the Sex Pistols and Buzzcocks and all those great bands. And yes, I am talking about the Stranglers. Now, I always like to start these episodes off by telling you how I got into the band, and that was basically because I would see their records around, I would hear my friends play them, and I was thinking, yeah, they're pretty good. But I really connected with them about 1979 or so, when I started hearing songs like Duchess and stuff off of their fourth album called The Raven, and that's really when they finally clicked for me. What I want to say before I start is, on my CD Junkie videos, I basically focus on the studio releases. I very rarely talk about a live album, even though they tend to be popular. And a band like the Stranglers has plenty of them in their catalog, but I want to focus on the albums. And on this video, I decided, since they have so many, I'm just focusing on those albums. I'm not going to talk about great compilations in their catalog like these and so many more. So I hope you understand that. I'm going to go through their whole catalog right now, and we're going to start off with the debut album. It is called Rattus Norvegicus, came out in 1977. Now, to me, the Stranglers are very much, they were the Doors of punk rock. If you listen to the late Dave Greenfield's keyboards, you will hear that sort of Ray Manzarek type sound creeping in and out of the band's music. Of course, they're very different. Their sound sort of relies heavily on the bass, which the Doors didn't. And Jean-Jacques Brunel, J.J. Brunel, just an incredible bass player. He had a unique sound, this real heavy but aggressive, kind of fuzzy bass sound. I'm not a musician, so I can't tell you what kind it is, but when you hear it, you know it. And of course, Jet Black on drums, who I think was probably about 10 years older than every other member of the band. And of course, lead vocalist and guitarist Hugh Cornwell. I think the Stranglers really came from the pub rock scene. They had already perfected their sound, and it just got heavier when punk rock came around. And this right here is just absolutely fantastic. It features a lot of familiar songs like Sometimes, Hanging Around, Peaches, Get a Grip on Yourself, Down in the Sewer. Now, this has been issued many times on CD. This is the latest one, and it's jam-packed with even more bonus tracks than all the other ones. It seems like every year, a version will come out, it will have 2 or 3 bonus tracks, then another 2 or 3. I don't think that they're going to do any more, so definitely check out the Stranglers' Rattus Norvegicus. That was their 1977 debut. And one thing I do want to tell you is that in 1977, I was 14 years old, and I never trusted a punk or new wave band that sported a mustache. And look at Dave Greenfield had a mustache. He was the one exception to my rule for quite a while. I don't know why I was anti-mustache. Maybe because I couldn't grow one when I was 14. Rattus Norvegicus, 1977, absolutely fabulous. Also in 1977 came a great sophomore album called No More Heroes, another great collection of songs. This is the most recent reissue, remaster. And that features a lot of great songs like Dagenham Dave, Bring on the Nubiles, Something Better Change, No More Heroes. It's just absolutely fantastic. Peasant and the Big Shitty. Out of the bonus tracks, 5 Minutes is one of the most popular. And this is more of that same sound. It's very heavy bass, very aggressive, punky, snarly, those Doors-type keyboards, and just really sounded great and wonderful. I believe Martin Rushent was producing at the time, and he just really separated those things. Sort of like what he was doing with the Buzzcocks, how every instrument was perfectly recorded and separated, but then brought all together, and it just sounded like rough. So No More Heroes, second album, 1977. 1978, out comes the album Black and White. This is another great album with songs like Tank, and Nice and Sleazy is another big song of theirs. This is the most recent remaster. This also has Outside Tokyo, Toiler on the Sea, lots of great songs and bonus tracks as well. Now, this is the third album by the Stranglers, and they hadn't changed their sound. So people are start thinking, wow, they kind of a one-trick pony, because in a sense, you can take a song off of this album, put it on Rattus Norvegicus, take a song off of No More Heroes, put it on this, and they would still relatively fit in quite easy. I mean, it was only, a year and a half time period, I understood what people were talking about when they said they were sounding kind of samey, but I was okay with it. But then in 1979, that is really when I connected with the band with the album Raven. And this is just an absolutely wonderful album. This is a complete different change in direction. They've toned down the punk edginess. It's still very punk, but it was a lot more accessible to a lot more people. This, in fact, had some of my favorite songs like Duchess, Raven, Barack Bordello, Nuclear Device, and it has the Men in Black theme. And one of my favorite non-album singles, Bear Cage, is on this. That's one of the songs that really, really hooked me. And but that's The Raven. That came out in 1979. But then now when this album came out and they actually made a conscious decision to change, to move forward musically, people were saying, oh, they don't sound like they used to. And these are the same people that were complaining that they were sounding the same. So, you just can't win. The Stranglers, doesn't matter what anybody says, you be the judge. If you thought The Raven was a change in direction. The Gospel, according to the Men in Black, came out in 1981. I have to admit, it still, after nearly 40 years, hasn't quite clicked as a whole album to me. Lots of great songs on it. But they really, really toned down the punk edge, and it just became quirky, almost experimental art rock. I still loved it, but it didn't hit me like The Raven. But bonus tracks on this, and they added like Who Wants the World, which is another great non-album track. I have friends who say that this is their favorite Stranglers album, and I'm totally cool with that. It's not necessarily one of my favorites, but I'm still glad to own it, glad to own the updated remaster, because I love the Stranglers. And then later that year, they put out the equally strange but wonderful La Folie album, and this is so stylistically diverse that it's far more successful as an album than Gospel According to the Men in Black, because this is more song-oriented, more pop-oriented. They still experiment more with keyboards, but they found sort of a perfect balance between, let's say, The Raven and Men in Black. But this has a lot of great songs like Non-Stop None. Well, it's actually called Non-Stop on the album, but the real name of the song is Non-Stop None. Everybody Loves You When You're Dead. Let Me Introduce You to the Family, The Man They Love to Hate, Strange Little Girl, and of course the hugely successful Golden Brown, which is this beautiful, wonderful waltz thing, mostly keyboards by Dave Greenfield, and then Hugh singing. And it was a huge, huge hit in the UK. This was their last time with that label. I think it was EMI or something. Well, now it's EMI. But then they signed with Sony, and they went off on a crazy, wonderful direction again. And by this time, I was full on into the Stranglers, because I love a band that experiments and moves on and doesn't stay in the same place for too long. Feline, 1983, is mostly like acoustic guitar and keyboards and electronic rhythms, very creative, and in my opinion, really not that commercial, but it was actually a commercial success. It actually sort of moves on from where Strange Little Girl and Golden Brown were, but is not as catchy as those songs, but still some amazing, amazing tracks on this album, including Midnight Summer Dream, European Female, All Roads Lead to Rome, and my favorite song on this album is Paradise. And of course, this is a bonus track edition. And that's 1983, the Stranglers, Feline, doing something different and just really, really knocking it out of the park, but not in a punk rock way. This is just a band evolving, and I love that. Then came probably their most commercial period. Aural Sculpture came out in 1984. What a friggin' pop delight this album is. It takes everything that they did in the last couple years and just really streamlines it and just makes it really commercial. And it just shows that they're great songwriters, great players, great singers, everything. And of course, the punk rock people are going, ah! But I'm going, yeah. And anyway, this contains a lot of great songs like Skin Deep and Let Me Down Easy, No Mercy, North Winds, one of my favorites off this, Punch and Judy. As a bonus track, one of their B-sides, In One Door, is better than most bands' A-sides. Now, a lot of their B-sides are kind of weird. That's where they really would experiment. But Aural Sculpture, it was perfect for 1984. It's a wonderful pop album. 1986, and they come out with Dreamtime, yet continuing in that same direction as Aural Sculpture, but sort of trimming it down a little bit, maybe a little moodier than that album, but it contains one of their most popular songs, again, because these guys always had hits throughout their entire career. It was called Always the Sun, and it's just fantastic. But the album also has Dreamtime, Was It You, Nice and Nice was a single, and this has bonus tracks as well. They came back in 1990 with the album 10, and this was produced by Roy Thomas Baker, and is this big, bolstering pop album, maybe a little overproduced for the Stranglers, but still filled with great songs. I don't understand why they would focus on a cover of 96 Tears as one of the first tracks to be played on US radio, but the rest of the album has a lot of really cool tracks on it. Sweet Smell of Success and Let's Celebrate, Too Many Teardrops, Where I Live, Never to Look Back, and there's bonus tracks on here, All Day and All the Night, which was a studio track on a live album that came out, I think either before or after this album. And then a remix of Always the Sun that came out on a best of. And this was the last album with the original lineup of Hugh Cornwell, J.G. Burnell, Jet Black, and Dave Greenfield. Hugh Cornwell left the band, and everybody thought the band was doomed. Now, Hugh Cornwell went off to a very successful solo career. I will not talk about the solo careers on this video. I'll probably do a separate video for Hugh somewhere down the line. But what the Stranglers did is they brought in two people. They brought in guitar player John Ellis, who I think had been in the Vibrators, and they brought in a vocalist named Paul Roberts, who was not the Paul Roberts from Sniffin' the Tears. In 1992, they put out the album Stranglers in the Night. Great collection of songs here. Now, this is a period where they didn't get a lot of airplay, and the albums were released independently, but they're still very much worth your time. They don't sound like the Stranglers that made the last few albums, but the Stranglers that made the last few albums didn't sound like the Stranglers who made the few albums before that, didn't sound like the Stranglers who made the few albums before that. This is a fine album, a little darker. I don't want to say it's goth, but this was a band right in the midst of trying to figure out what they needed to do now that their main vocalist had left. Now, J.J. Burnell had sung a bunch of songs through their career, but Hugh Cornwell was really the guy most associated as the vocalist of the Stranglers. They do a great job on this album. There's a picture there. Songs like Time to Die and Sugar Bullets is great, Heaven or Hell, definitely worth your time. 1995, out comes About Time, another fine album with that same lineup. This features like Golden Boy, Money, Face, Still Life, She Gave It All. Sounding a little more confident with this lineup. Bunch of great songs. 1997, out comes Written in Red, and that's got another great batch of songs, such as In Heaven She Walks, Silver into Blue. Stranglers, 1997, Written in Red. Following year, 1998, out comes Coup de Grace, and the album features more great tracks. You Don't Think That What You've Done Is Wrong, Jump Over My Shadow, In the End, No Reason. Fine album. Coup de Grace, Stranglers, 1998. Took another 6 years, but out comes the album Norfolk Coast. John Ellis had left the band, and he was replaced by guitarist Baz Warren. Paul Roberts is still there as the vocalist, and of course Dave, Jet, and Jean-Jacques are there. This album was produced by a few pretty well-known musicians, such as David Ruffy from The Ruts, and then Peter Glenister, who was in a band called The Hitmen back in the late 70s, early 80s, if anybody remembers those guys. And I have to admit, this album sounds a lot stronger than the previous two, even though those were good. They were sort of plotting a new musical course. This has got like Big Thing Coming and Long Black Veil, Lost Control. Fine album. Stranglers, Norfolk Coast. Came out in 2004. 2 years later, they put out their 16th album, Sweet 16. And by this time, Paul Roberts had left the band. Baz Warren, the new guitar player, took over lead vocalist as well, so they became a quartet again. And the old Strangler sound came back. So you had the more thumping J.J. Burnell bass. You had the more Dorsey keyboards that Dave Greenfield was so famous for. And it's really, really a great album. Songs like Unbroken, Spectre of Love, Relentless, See Me Coming, Anything Can Happen. Really super strong album. One of their strongest albums in years. And like I said, that's not putting the other albums down. And this album is really, really fantastic. 2012, and out comes the album Giants. Yeah, that's kind of a gruesome cover. But this is the Stranglers in 2012, and it continues what Sweet 16 did. It goes back to sort of the old formula. It sounds like an updated version. They're not ignoring their past anymore, but they're still moving forward. Now, this is the 2 CD version, contains like a live set, but I'm going to focus on the studio album, which is fantastic. And this has another Camden Afternoon, the title track, Lowlands, Mercury Rising, another great Stranglers studio release. Unfortunately, this was the last Stranglers studio release. Dave Greenfield recently passed away. The original lineup is basically down to J.J. Brunel and Jet Black, but Jet Black sort of retired, and he continues to work on and off on the studio, but they have a live drummer now. But this 2012 album is the final Stranglers studio release. Anyway, that's it for me talking about the Stranglers. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe. And until the next time, remember me. I'm Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie.